I'll start off today by saying while the topic might sound a little heavy in its theme, the feeling, the experience of this episode actually feels very lightening because of how today's guest explores the topic in a pretty unusually unconventional approach. And it opens up a really different dialogue to the usual discussions around porn because Tyson is coming from a place of involving psychedelics and energetic awareness and body work and healing therapy and more. So while people often like to say that there is a huge difference from porn use and porn addiction, I have a theory that much like alcohol, where most who routinely drink would say that they are not alcoholics, but remove access to the alcohol. And there's probably going to be an adjustment that they'll have to make of how they manage themselves without it, which does indicate a level of addiction. And my feeling and my sense and my experience of body work and working with men, soma, myself, and being the aware woman that I am, and my perception of the inner reality and working with the inner body, uh, porn use is very often actual addiction. It's just undisclosed. It's the not self-aware level of addiction. Remembering that, as it said in this episode, over 80% of the typical porn that is viewed involves actual physical violence, aside from the sex that takes place being already violent to women's bodies, in that it's not about her pleasure, it's about her being a vessel to be used for a patriarchal fantasy. And a lot of people like to say, well, it's just a fantasy world, it's just fiction, and, claim that it doesn't affect a man's actual experience of women. Look around the world today. Look at how many women are unimpressed about what they've experienced with men. And no, this is not man hating. This is discernment. This is women waking up collectively to a level of self-determination beyond the paradigm that they're no longer willing to tolerate. And as we know, we call it here patriarchal sex. There's a moment at the start of this episode where actually both Tyson and I, we couldn't remember the name of this incredible woman who has been instrumental in making a lot of changes with porn use. So her name, I looked it up, is Layla Micklethwait, and she's an American anti-sex trafficking activist who started Trafficking Hub. It's a movement and a petition that was calling for Pornhub to be accountable for hosting and profiting from content linked to sex trafficking, child abuse, and non-consensual videos. And she's actually had a lot of success with making a lot of changes there, which isn't really, really, really incredible. She's really revolutionary, and anyone like her that's also doing that work. And before we dive into this episode, I want to mention that when it comes to sexual somatic educators out there, I've noticed that women who say that porn isn't so bad are either unaware of how much devastating impacts and heavily documented research has already been done on it to prove otherwise. And it's a way to this thing of women downplaying the impact of porn. The way that I read this and sense this, they're often covertly trying to score points with the men, trying to appeal as sex positive and signal that they're men friendly. But because now more and more men are on the other side of porn addiction and they are clearly naming how devastating it can be, it reveals the internalized patriarchy in these women, in my opinion. The thing I appreciate the most about this episode with today's guest, Tyson, is how he goes well beyond the usual social conversations on this topic. Because typical things that I've heard a lot in the sort of non-professional settings, where people say that not all men are addicted, and it doesn't affect all men in a negative way. Because the thing is, if you hear that type of thing from someone and from a man, it's likely that he's still watching it. And so he's got to defend it somehow. And of course, some men are going to have far more negative impacts than others. But what I mean is it's always having a negative effect, particularly when it's physically violent. Patriarchal sex imagery that is being masturbated to and ejaculated to, it is creating a strong somatic imprinting. And we discussed that today. It's a normalized paradigm, but that does not make it okay. And the last thing I want to share before we get into this is that I have a feeling that some who hear this, even some women, not just men, they may well think that the topics we're discussing, such as spiritual warfare, is only relevant to some people. I expect some listening to take that mental position. So before this episode even begins, I want to say that if you notice that, to get curious at the speed at which you might be jumping to that kind of conclusion without taking the time to reflect and to feel and to deeply check in with your body, not just your mind, into the reality of what Tyson Adams is saying here. Because it could be very easy to dismiss and deflect what's hidden in plain view around this theme. But the thing is, if you're willing to face this more hidden reality from the effects of porn use, you have access to a way out that's a level of somatic liberation that could totally revolutionize and resensitize your sex life to profound physical and emotional and spiritual intimacy that you could be having instead. So please know that intention for me saying these things and for sharing this episode is totally in favor of true masculinity being anchored on this planet, where purpose beyond just personal gain inside the matrix is no longer getting hijacked. So this is being shared today in the spirit of presence and the real strength of men being restored. Welcome to this provocative and heartfelt podcast, where patriarchy is defined as a paradigm that both men and women uphold in different ways. Here you get to listen in on genuine conversations between leaders from around the world to discover more mutual respect and less division, as well as more pleasure and love in your life. My name is Devashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversations. I am sitting here with a man that is I'm struck by how open you are, Tyson. And I want to introduce you to everyone. So Tyson Adams is a men's sex coach who is trained as an internal family systems therapist, body worker, and psychedelic facilitator. And I noticed you online and reached out to you, Tyson, because of your area of focus with, I think a big part of your work is helping people, predominantly men, I imagine, detox from porn addiction.
Yeah.
And I see that you do quite a bit of dynamic, independent research in this area that stood out to me. So I'm really happy that you could join me today in this conversation.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Could you tell us firstly a little bit about where you're coming from in that focus of supporting men to become aware of their relationship with pornography and what that's doing to them and their lives.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't normally start here, but I'm going to start here for whatever reason. And so I teach what I call a mythopoetic map. And the mythopoetic map is that the way that a man treats his penis is the way that he treats everyone and everything in the world. And so the idea is that the way that a man treats his body shows up in the way that he treats the world. And so when you look at men in pornography, porn basically teaches us to use ourselves as a means to an end. And that means to an end is to use our penis as a means to soothe. And in that soothing process, it's not right or wrong or good or bad, but it definitely has an impact on our bodies and our psyches and also our community and our culture. That shows up in also the way that we treat humanity, treat nature, right? So porn's a big cultural, it shapes culture like in so many huge ways. So yeah.
It really does. And I'd love to learn a bit more about so you shared your approach, but why are you personally called to focus on this?
Hmm. Yeah. So I first saw pornography when I was 9. I found a Playboy in a field, and that pretty much led to a 20-year porn addiction. But when I was 11 and a half is when the internet hit. And so I'm 41. And so I was, young, I was prepubescent. And back then, there wasn't pornography the way that we have it today, where there's previews. You would just type in a search term, and then the video would download, and then you'd click play. And whatever was shown, you would be on that ride. And so the things that I saw when I was very young were not appropriate. They were violent, they were disturbing. And as I went through my trauma training, I began to understand that those images and those eroticized uh, images that I saw were still located in my own body and in my own soma, and they had created a particular way of relating to sexuality that was showing up in the way that I was relating with everyone through my whole development. And I went off to university in Seattle, and I joined a fraternity. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what a fraternity was. But my friend or my girlfriend at the time, her brother was there. And so I joined. And when I joined, there was a library of thousands of pornography that was indexed. And we even had a porn chairman. So this is somebody who indexed the porn by genre and by porn star. And so we basically were in this sort of misogynistic bubble that was normalizing pornography. And it
Mm,
was one of those things that we would joke around about, like, hey, get off the internet because we can't do our damn homework kind of thing. So that was where I grew up.
yes. Yes, what an experience. And there's a few questions I want to ask you out of that. And the first one, how did you come to realize that that imagery was stored in your soma, in parts of
Hmm.
your body? How did you recognize that? I'm thinking of men listening that are open to this conversation, women listening who know that this could be really important for their partners to listen to. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the most direct ways is ejaculatory control. If you have premature ejaculation, that's one piece to it. But as I've sort of gone deep into this, both with psychedelic research, but then also with understanding mirror neurons, what we see, we there's a part of the brain that puts ourselves into the scene as one of the characters in the scene. And so what we're unaware of unconsciously when we're watching pornography is we're also taking on the scene into our own bodies. And as I explored psychedelics, especially more internal journeys where I would take psilocybin or ayahuasca or other forms of psychedelics, and I would close my eyes and go inward, I could sense and feel the energetics of all of that pornography in my actual nervous system. And I couldn't turn it off. It was as if it was just on auto replay, and it was just scene after scene, and my body would, move into large amounts of somatic release, trauma release, ultimately, some form of trauma and or just eroticized wounding, terror, ultimately. And so the process was in moments rather violent, but through men's work and through therapy and through, grief ceremony, I was able to sit with it long enough and learn how to work with it to be able to move it and to integrate it and ultimately let it go so that I could feel safe in my own nervous system.
Mm,
Yeah.
gosh. And just to go a little further into something that you said then,
Mm-hmm.
could you help people make the connection of the terror that you've mentioned with the visual imagery that you had absorbed?
Yeah. So there's some research being done by an organization. I can't recall it right now, but maybe it'll come to me. But they basically have proven now that 89% of pornography has some form of violence in it. So non-consent, um, eroticized wounding, very strange genres, over, um, yeah, hitting, slapping, those types of things. And so when we're watching pornography, we're bringing those frequencies into our own body. We're effectively eroticizing violence. And so when we ejaculate to that, there is a reset. We do release, the different types of brain chemicals that make us feel good for a moment, but what's left over is the residual residue of that porn that we've just consumed. And so that stays, but our ejaculation leaves. And then we feel the energetics of that we were watching. And so it's very important that we attune to that and that we protect our children and ourselves from that which we're looking at. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a lot. This is a lot to take in. And it's been mentioned several times on this podcast already, the impact that pornography has in various ways. But I know that you're someone who has a big focus on it. And so for that research to say that 89% of
mhm.
it displays violence, it just can't be said enough, like clearly enough, that the majority of porn that people are consuming is programming them to enact behaviors because it is not just something that can be visually watched to have a masturbation experience in the moment. It's imprinted on your subconscious mind, which is also your whole body.
Yeah.
And that tends to be enacted. And women who have answered, men and women who've answered the survey that goes with this podcast, because this is a project beyond the podcast. So there's a survey asking people to share their experiences of what could be called patriarchal sex. And a lot of it has the distortions of pornography, such as the violence we're mentioning here, as
Mm-hmm.
a root cause of the harm and suffering and abuse and violence that has been experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And what that brings up for me is ultimately, I think we need to understand pornography for what it is. So ultimately, the organizations that run these porn sites, they don't care about who we are. They just see an IP address. And so they don't care about our goals and dreams and age and our nervous systems and our religious beliefs and our relationships. They only care about profit. And it doesn't matter the impact. Their aim and their goal is to get us as addicted as we possibly can as soon as possible. because when our little finger or our fat finger clicks the button, they get paid. And so it's important to see it for what it truly is, which is that they've colonized and um, commercialized our legitimate life force. And there is all kinds of ritual abuse that happens in pornography that goes out into the world as a frequency. And when we watch pornography, we expose ourselves to the archetypal frequencies and energies that actually run through the dark underbelly of pornography, and they infiltrate our bodies, our minds, our psyches, our souls, and even our dreams. And they take us to places that we don't feel sane anymore. And so I think it's just really important to understand that we are under attack, and that it does require men and boys and women, but most especially, men and men's work, to be able to throw up a middle finger and to be like, fuck no, like absolutely no more. And a lot of men are cut off from their healthy, primal, masculine rage in and around the ways in which our innocence has been stolen and commercialized and taken. And then women are the recipients and the ones that we go reenact what we see in porn. And so there's also healthy, primal feminine rage that also needs to come through in the ways in which women must hold very strong boundaries around what is acceptable or not acceptable inside of their relational dynamics and who they're willing to date. Because when we open ourselves to letting those energies flow through us, they transmute, to whoever it is that's on the receiving end of those sexual experiences.
Thank you for saying that. I feel it's so important for women to hear that, and from a man is really impactful. So thank you for saying that so clear. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you about this demonic influence in there, this dark magic influence, because I can see you've looked into it far more than what I have, considering your personal deprogramming process and the work that you focus on. But just before we go there, I want to mention, because we've talked about the huge amount of violence, actual physical harm, violence, but you also mentioned the non-consent, and there's also so much underage rape because how
Yeah.
can a child consent? It's always rape in that case. And just in case anyone listening hasn't seen, because it's very, very recent information, unfortunately, I can't remember her name right now, but there's a woman that is such a force in being in quite direct combat with Pornhub, actually. And she has caused in America for huge sections of what they uploaded to be removed. And
Mm-hmm.
she's calling for, laws to be made and enforced that help prevent the non-consent and the children, like really young, not just, a young girl, especially that could be confused for her age. We're talking very clearly children. And
Mm.
and this is highly viewed. I don't know if you know any stats on that, Tyson.
Yeah, I was following her. I'm trying to remember her name as well.
Yeah.
But I did see that ruling recently, and I was very excited to see it. And I don't know the statistics, but I think it's so critical. It's so beautiful. I mean, America is the number one consumer of child pornography. The amount of pedophilia and sexual trauma in America is just astronomical. And coming from a family where there was sexual trauma in both directions on either side of my line, um, I this is a dear topic to myself. And so what I think is really important is yeah, calling awareness to the importance of governance creating solid age verifications for pornography, and they're still going to see it, children. And so, but at the same time, I think we must stand up as parents too and protect our children. And the best way that we can do that, of course, as a man, is just to outgrow pornography yourself. You know,
Yeah.
yes, yes, of course, we do need to have browser blockers on young children's devices, and we need to help have really important conversations with them about what's out on the internet and things that can hurt them. But I do also think that it's super important that we do our own work so that we uh, can support good sexual development in our children. So,
That's it. I mean, it's so frightening, the statistics of how commonly watched and created child pornography actually is. And it's so sad. It's just
yeah.
so sad that this is happening en masse at all, but en masse. And like you've said, it's not just a matter of parents trying to dictate to their children what they are consuming and not consuming. Where's the embodiment in
Mm-hmm.
the parent, in the fathers? Are they
Yeah.
consuming it? Because children can feel and sense and they follow, and it's so well documented in child psychology. This is not some new age theory. This is science. This is how it works. And we all know this. We all remember being children. You learn by what is demonstrated to you, what is embodied, what you can sense and feel, and all of the unseen reality. This is what gets imprinted. This is what gets deep into our subconscious minds. So there is no reality in a father trying to tell his son, his children to stay away from this or don't do that. If he's consuming it and participating in it, it just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah, your little boys and little girls, they feel your flinches when they walk in your office and you move quickly because of whatever it is you're consuming.
Mm,
For me to be able to hand my device to my partner or to my, stepsons, not yet, they're not quite my stepsons, but stepsons to be, and to be able to say, you can use my device however you'd like, is freedom because there's not anything there that it's going to cause trauma. Right?
yeah, yeah. And I think it's really important that voices like ours really speak up on this because there are, I think usually it's assumed that those that are, sharing these statistics and saying that this is harmful and highlighting the amount of suffering that's happening are often coming from a puritanical perspective. But actually, for the people that we are and the practitioners that we are, we're very integrated with seeing the primal level of reality as sacred, as divine. We're not shut off from that. We're not afraid of that. So,
Mm-hmm.
for those of us that have really embodied that truth, there's a different view that we have to bring because oftentimes, even in sacred sexuality circles, actually, I've encountered this directly in some groups I've been involved in before, where anything around the discernment in this realm of pornography is not welcome in favor of not shaming a man's experience of sexuality.
Mm.
And that's a problem. That's a
Yeah.
really mixed message.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for naming that. And I think men need to be, it's the way I look at it is this: men, how do we hold men accountable if they just stay on the periphery as a lone wolf? And that's the question that we're constantly having. So a man who doesn't surround himself with other men can feel as if his behavior is in integrity or is, um, he can feel as if it's a high moral ground. But if he were to share his behavior with 10 other men and had 9 or 10 other mirrors, he might see, oh my gosh, the way that I'm behaving is actually maybe not so aligned. And so I think what's important is that for men, 99% of the men that find me, they had no rite of passage coming into manhood from boyhood into manhood. And in addition to that, those men also had pornography as a way to educate them around what is sex. And so what I always, help men to see is yes, on one hand, we have to put our middle finger up and say, fuck you to the porn companies. But then on another hand, we have to put our hands together and bow and say, thank you, porn, for soothing me through all of the hell of my childhood, whether it's an alcoholic father or, moving homes or towns, or somebody died, or you got bullied when you were a kid, or whatever. Boys go through a lot of difficulties in their teenage years. And when they find pornography, it works. It's a very, for me, I mean, this is obviously I'd had sugar up to that point, but cigarettes, cannabis, alcohol, none of those other things were in my awareness because, I was still a young boy. I was prepubescent. And so I think finding that early on became the way that I soothed anytime I was angry or sad or bored or sick or numb. And so we can't demonize it, and we also need to. It's like it's both and. Like we do not demonize it in the sense of judgmental, but like we do need to see it for what it is. There is evil energy running through that is intended to harm, malevolent energy running through. So see it for what it is. And then also to outgrow it, to outgrow porn, not just to quit, but to like outgrow where you don't need it anymore, is to also say like thank you for keeping me safe through all of those years and decades where I didn't have a men's group or a father or a mother or the ability to grieve the loss of that partner that cheated on me or whatever it might be. And so taking that approach feels to be more balanced in the way in which we take a step forward out of that addiction.
Yes, yes. And yeah, like as you said, it's not even necessary to demonize it. All we need to do is see it clearly. What are the
Yeah.
impacts? What are the effects? It's just it's evident. And
Yeah.
I'm really glad to hear you use the word soothe because sometimes I've heard men go straight to saying it's regulating their nervous system, and truly it's not because it's incredibly disruptive to nervous system regulation. Is really damaging, but it is an attempt to self-soothe, and that's true. But smoking cigarettes is also an attempt to self-soothe, right?
Yeah.
And neither of those things are actually in alignment with well-being. Um,
Mhm.
and the why there is such a need to self-soothe and the absence of rite of passage for boys and young men, as you've mentioned. I mean, this is attending to the inner life. This is attending to inner nature, to the feminine.
Mhm.
And this is another reason why this whole project, that this podcast is about and highlighting is how it's not in a man's favor for his health and his development and his self-mastery and success to be disconnected from his own inner nature, which is the realm of the feminine.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Can you say more? How do you define the inner feminine for the from the in your experience of working with men? What would you say?
Well, for both, well, for all genders, there is so much disconnect from that inner reality, and yet there is more sense of permission or allowing for women to feel more and to be in their feelings, but not so
Hmm.
for men and boys. And
Yeah.
so I would define it as the invisible, unseen levels of reality, which is sensing. So it's instinct sensing, it's feeling, it's emotion, it's everything beyond the physical in a sense, as well as the physical. But in terms of what people hide, or parents, let's say when you're a child, what people hide of their real, authentic experience
Mm. Hmm.
and
Yeah.
how children feel all of that and they can
Mm.
get very confused. I remember feeling very confused as a child because I
Mm.
could feel and sense into everyone, and I was so uh, shocked at like why are people not saying and expressing what they're feeling inside? There's this constant contradiction.
Yeah.
And so we all have that ability to sense and feel like that, maybe some more than others. But for a boy to grow up having access to that, but there being no reference, no context for the rightness of his inner experience, no one really checking and asking, how are you really feeling? What are you thinking about? How are you really going there? You know, a lot
Mhm.
of us were not parented in a way that highlighted any importance of that inner realm.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 Well, thank you for naming that. I couldn't agree more. What it brings up for me was that when I found pornography around 12 or 11 and a half, but when I first started getting into it at around 12 is when I started rejecting my mother, right? So it's not only that we don't have necessarily parents to check in on our feelings, but that my mom did used to come in and sing a song and give me a kiss and give me a hug goodnight. But then because I was preoccupied with the pornography that I wanted to go look at, I would shut her down and I would try to get her out of the room as soon as possible because I was feeling guilty and also really excited to go do this secretive thing. And then
Wow.
moving downstairs as soon as I could, or way earlier than I would have if I would have not had porn, moving downstairs at 13, being even further away from her. And ultimately the porn created in me sort of a rejection of my mother and therefore the beginning of the disturbance of outsourcing um, that feminine energy and that nurturance into the pornography and then of course
Wow.
into the way in which that gets projected into my partners and what I expected from them as well.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard a man articulate that specifically. So porn created a wedge between you and your mother, you
Yeah.
and the source of feeling connected, feeling goodness, feeling loved, cared for, nurtured. And
Yeah.
it replaced that, but in a
Yeah.
way that it's so disconnected, it's so empty. To start implementing practical ways to go beyond patriarchal sex in your life, I've created some easy step-by-step, low-cost ways for you to start having that outcome now. These are to elevate relationship with yourself, with a future partner, or to transform the relationship you are already in, whether you're a man or a woman. These practical steps are effective, they're tested, and they are somatic things that you can start today so that you don't default into old patterns that bring the same disappointment and resentments, no matter how long you may have felt stuck in what you don't want. So, see the link in the show notes to register for your guide to going beyond patriarchal sex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's really
And
incredibly hard.
it creates a pseudo relationship. It's as if the porn creates the the soothing that we once had with mom, but especially for boys, like in my case, there was a bit of enmeshment between my mother and I because my father and my mother were having difficulties. And so it's a part of our individuation process to say no to mom, but the nature of pornography being the pseudo relationship, which is not real as the conduit,
Yeah.
created a warped reality. And I remember my mom catching me watching or looking at pornography and feeling into the guilt of that as she took it away, and then having that experience of, feeling so conflicted and ashamed and all of those things. And then having my dad talk to me about it. And so, those are the types of things that boys go through, men go through, and then they grow up and that just shows up in their relational dynamics. So,
Yes. And I agree that it's important not to shut down in a shaming way a boy's like in that instance where they found out about what you were doing and that there was an addiction maybe happening. Um, But at the same time, what I was saying earlier is that there's this paradigm of the sex positive community where it's like so hell bent on clinging to that they're often it doesn't come with discernment to say, well, of course, sexuality is beautiful and healthy, and everyone needs to feel a positive connection with that. This is good, but there are versions of it that are yeah, really inverted reality, really disconnected and not for in alignment with anyone's health. Like it's important to be able to say that there's a distinction.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for naming that. And I haven't been in a lot of sex positive communities, or like I've not done ISTA or done any of these sort of temple nights and things, but I have a ton of female friends that have and male friends that have, and they tell me about things. And I would say that you're seeing this right now being unearthed, where men that are creating these containers, or that they are facilitators, haven't actually outgrown pornography, and therefore are leading from those frequencies, and they're abusing their power, and their shadows are coming out and through these containers. And women that have had sexual trauma are drawn to them, and then you end up having these reenactments of these dynamics. And so I see it and I hear it. I've actually worked now with uh, a dozen women that have been sexually abused in medicine spaces as well. So these are
Wow.
women that are going to male facilitation, ayahuasca, LSD, ketamine, DMT, mushrooms, and they're going in with an aim for healing, and then they're coming out of these experiences having been abused. And so it's not just sex positive communities. You're also seeing how medicine shamans and neo shamans are not having gone through their own porn addictions, and then they're creating spaces, and they're doing these obviously sexual deviant acts, and then they'll say things like, oh well, um, I'm helping you with your sexual trauma by touching you in these ways in order to help alchemize that, right? Which is just completely asinine and totally like just destructive. You don't heal trauma through creating trauma. You Not at all. Like trauma integration is through witnessing and unshaming it, and allowing for whatever happened back there to be witnessed with a unshaming witness, to be able to validate it and hold space for that grief to come through, to be witnessed. Right.
Oh, in medicine communities, that's a whole other thing. And that's not only sexual abuse, in that case, that's spiritual abuse as well,
Yeah.
because someone is so vulnerable and the facilitator is providing a spiritual connected experience. Like that's what people are there for.
Yeah.
And that is relevant in, many traditional Buddhist tantric lineages where, there's been so much repression and someone goes in for an astrology reading and comes out having been touched in places that they didn't consent to. Like there's just so many different ways that manifests, and the very self-serving comments like it's to help someone. This is so, so, so abusive. I'm wondering if this is a good point to go into the psychedelic research that you have done, because we just mentioned medicine community. And I mean, it's fascinating to me the level of research you've taken upon yourself to explore this and get to know these places really intimately. So,
Mhm.
what has that involved, Tyson?
Yeah. So I watch pornography not to get aroused, but I watch pornography on psychedelics as research. So I've looked at pornography on mushrooms, on LSD, on ketamine, on DMT, with the aim to understand what is actually going on here, what is truly happening. And the easiest thing that I'll say, or one of the easiest things to understand, you may need to have a trauma aware background, but you have fight, freeze, flee, and fawn. And what I've noticed is within the fawn response, um, what I noticed in myself first and foremost was that there's violence in the internet, there's violence in pornography. And what it was doing was it was having me fawn response, sort of almost a freeze. It's kind of a freeze fawn, but ultimately, as you're, taking this kind of content in for decades, you're you're masturbating in a particular frequency. So that frequency is usually secrecy, silence, shame, and speed. So you're in this kind of position and you're looking through the front part of the eye and you're dialed into whatever the scene is and you're doing the thing. And what I noticed was that what is violent, what is dangerous, what is scary is where my penis would get aroused. So, in
Wow.
other words, the only way that I could actually get turned on before I started to do all this work was through extreme novelty, through things that were ultimately um, making me feel scared or feel like this isn't wrong. This is wrong. This is not right. And that can be eroticized wounding with weird genres like stepfather kind of things, how the weird genres that play out. But then also just the nature of how um, pornography is in terms of just the non-consent. And so what I learned through this process was that when that arousal, like when your template for arousal is violence or danger, then when we get into a secure, functioning, safe relationship with a partner who really sees us, our nervous system is not able to, and the dopamine and the wiring of the brain is not actually wired to be able to get aroused. And so what was happening with me is that I would have to fantasize in order to get arousal, in order to be intimate. But then as I went through the therapeutic process and I started looking at pornography, I started to see like, oh, actually, I can look at this pornography not through an erotic lens, but through an a critical lens. And as I
Yes.
started to look at it through a critical lens, which is like, oh, that's racist, that's violent, that's certainly power over dynamics, that's an underage girl, right? Then I started to see like, oh, my nervous system, it actually can't get aroused, as in violence and danger and non-consent is actually there's no arousal at all. And then as I went through that journey, and then when I'm in a secure functioning relationship where there's love that exists, then it's quite easy to get aroused because the love is what is arousing. So you're moving from thinking your way and experiencing violence as arousal to moving into, safety and love is what is arousing. And so you're ultimately, when you outgrow porn, you're flip-flopping your arousal template. You're getting back to a baseline, secure functioning relationship with yourself and with other ultimately.
What an unbelievable trajectory, and this is, I imagine, why people say who focus on pornography and its effects of how someone can begin watching something that, I don't know, is maybe not even violent or neutral-ish in a way, to end up, going to more and more and more extreme things.
Mm-hmm.
And partly that's the algorithm, but you're just saying from the internal perspective, like the mechanics of arousal that you're being conditioned and programmed to respond to, that this
Yep.
is a systematic process, actually. Have you seen that be the case of, because I have been reading here and there about how some men that, wouldn't have thought they'd be watching child pornography might end up in that direction because of exactly what you just spoke about.
Yeah. So not all men escalate to disturbing and more violence, but I would say it's probably my experience of working with hundreds of men, probably over 200 men one on one with pornography addiction. I would say um, probably 3 out of 10 escalate all the way to very severe places.
Right.
Um, Often, men with repressed sexual trauma or lineage burdens that are out of their awareness are more inclined to go into those spaces because the pornography is helping them to piece together that which has happened to them or that which happened to their mother or their father that they've inherited. And so pornography in your search terms are indications of where your healing is ultimately at, or where the trailhead for your healing can be if you were to go down that and work with it therapeutically. The other piece that I want to name with psychedelics that I've understood, and I would assume that you understand this too, from a chakra energetic level and a field level, your astral body. Um, my experience is when I'm on psychedelics, I am very attuned to where my field is at. And when it's interfacing with other people's fields and how that feels and or doesn't feel. And one of the things that was really interesting was when I started watching porn on psychedelics, especially like DMT, I could see where the edge of my field was at. And I could either scoot the computer back a little bit outside of my field, or I could bring the computer a little bit forward inside of my field. And what I noticed was that not only was I taking in the pornography through my eyes and ears, which was impacting my brain and my nervous system, but it was also impacting my field. And I could actually see the distortions in my field, like as in I could sense almost like spiders like crawling in and around inside of my field. And I had to do work to clear all that out. And so what I want to name is that when we're taking in porn, we're not just taking it into the psyche and the soma, we're also taking it into our field. And then we go walk out in the world and we're looking through the world through that pornographic mindset, through all of that energy that we're accumulating and that we're not aware that we're doing. And so I've often, spoken to women and even seen experiments where they line up men and the women can tell like who are the men that are watching porn and who are not based upon just looking at them. And
Interesting.
it's fascinating to me how we hold that in our countenance and our face and our bodies and in our fields. So,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah.
I mean, I have experienced psychedelics in the past, like more than 15 years ago, because it's not a big focus for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and when I have, it's been in ceremony. But what I have experienced a lot of for most of my life is meditation, deep meditation, committed practice, which does open quite psychedelic experiences, actually. So my
Yeah.
awareness of my field, I feel that all the time,
Yeah.
and I can tell as a woman how programmed by porn a man is.
Yeah.
I can tell that from a distance, maybe even online, but most definitely in person. There
Mm-hmm.
is so much that's communicated from that instinctual primal body level. There's just volumes of information that is
Mm-hmm.
available if we're awake to feeling and sensing for sure.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate this edgy research that you've done. I've been an edge walker in other ways for my own exploration, and I just want to say I really respect that you've done that because that's not an easy thing to do. It shows
Mm-hmm.
how committed you are to getting to know intimately what you are helping people to unravel from and to know it to a level that's so beyond just your head, your mind, understanding it
Mm-hmm.
conceptually. So I'm sure that makes you a really incredible guide to come out of that addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. When men come to me with porn addictions, I'll say, send me what you're watching. Let me look at it. Let me see what the brainwashing is. Let me see what your psyche is arousing and let me help you unwire that because there
Right.
are there are types of pornography that literally hypnotize you. They literally tell you to lay down and then they do high like AI, like high dopamine. And there's types of porn that hypnotize you as a man to become a woman. So they literally want you to remove your penis and to worship, cock is ultimately the baseline message. And I've worked with over a dozen men that have been hypnotized by this type of porn, and it's sort of the cocaine, like the methamphetamines of porn. And I even have a client who he followed that brainwashing script. He went to Thailand, he removed his penis, he got breasts, and then came back and lived as a woman for, 2 years. Then he did an ayahuasca journey in Peru and realized that he'd been hypnotized into this ultimately this porn cult effectively, and then started the process of coming back into being a man. Now he's taking testosterone, and I've worked with him one-on-one and helping to clear those frequencies out. He didn't even have access to his lower half, but ultimately, now he's in the journey of actually reclaiming and rebuilding his penis. He's going on that path, and I'll be with him in the surgical process as he reclaims that in the future. And so he's in the process of writing a book, and if you want to talk to him, I'm happy to connect you. He's
Wow.
open with his story. But what I want to name, for those of you who are out there listening, is there are absolutely people that are doing malevolent things because they can get premiums on trans people and people that they literally weaponize you against your own body so that they can commercialize you and ultimately use you as a means to some end. So just be very careful.
This
Yeah.
is so shocking. I did not know that that was going on. I mean, I see all porn as hypnosis, and
Yeah.
but I didn't know that there were versions of it that are directly intending
Yeah.
openly to
Yeah.
hypnotize.
Yeah. And
Wow.
it literally is, it's university level hypnosis. I mean, it says this is a hypnosis track, you're going to lie down and we're going to hypnotize you to become a woman, and you're consenting to do this. And yet it's so incredibly intoxicating that men are finding me, because there's nobody that's like, literally nobody on earth specializes in this other than myself. And what's interesting, kind of moving into the way that I work with men and women, but I want to share a little bit about the body work that I do. Is that okay with you?
Well,
Yeah,
I wanted to go
sure.
further into maybe we'll do this first, actually, Tyson, if that's okay, because I would love
Great.
you to share about the work that you're doing. I would love everyone to hear that because
Okay.
it's so specialized where you're coming from. But the dark magic, can we go
Yeah.
there? Yeah, because the examples that you just spoke are so obviously dark spells on people.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole thing of pornography is that as well. And I've heard of the more subliminal kind,
Mm-hmm.
but you're now letting us know that there are very overt kinds. And how do you see the artificial vortex mass hypnosis of what I see as a mass scale of draining men of their essence and leaving them trapped in a very low level of development of consciousness? Like the bar has been set so incredibly low for men. To me, this occurs to me as warfare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd love
It
to,
is.
you've gone so deep into this. I'd love to hear, how do you see that?
Yeah, it is absolutely spiritual warfare, 100%. There is it's ritualized abuse, um, and it's very dark, and it's terrifying, you know, to be honest. And I don't say that to scare, but I just say it to be real. I feel like there's a question beneath your question, though. Is there something deeper? Yeah.
Well, I know what I see and how I sense it and feel it, and the siphoning of men's life force,
Yeah.
leaving them in a state where they actually can't rise up. They can't really develop into
Yes.
what's available to them. They can't be present in the world in that divine masculine capacity. This is the concern that I have
Mm,
always, and the cycle continuing, right?
yeah. Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. That is absolutely happening. They do not want us to rise up. They do not want us to be awake. They do not want us to grieve, to heal. They do not want us to take the young boys into the forest or the jungle or the desert and to actually have sex magic uh, rituals where we actually take the young boys coming of age and help them to understand how to treat women properly and lovingly and kindly, where they go find their relationship to sexuality, in nature versus in the digital world where they're being programmed from the moment that they begin, right? They don't want us to come together and actually move out of this because they're profiting from this, and it's a spell, and that spell is the ways in which we have been colonized and capitalized. So it is happening, and we have to work together. It's a deep. It takes a tremendous amount of spiritual courage to be able to stand in the face of this warfare that's happening here today. Yeah.
This is a lot to digest. It really,
Mm-hmm.
really is. I want to encourage everyone to just take a moment maybe to come back down and into your body and just experience the feeling of your inhale as fully as you can and your exhale as fully as you can, like taking a moment to pause and feel here. And please go ahead, Tyson, sharing what you actually offer, how men can connect with you. What does it look like to work with you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right now you can just find me either on Facebook and Instagram, and the best way is just to DM me if you're interested to connect. My website's still being revamped right now, so I don't have anything to share. But I am in November running a 30-day semen retention challenge for men to come together. Last year we had about 100 men that went through it. So look for that if you're following in your man. If you're a woman, feel free to send your men to me. And also I work with couples. I love, in fact, it's my favorite thing to work with couples that have intimacy issues or have sexual trauma is my specialty, and I love to do IFS therapy with couples and people fly in from around the world to work with me. I've had people fly in from Australia to work with me in California, so I also do a lot of in-person stuff with couples as well. So yeah.
Tyson, thank you for being part of breaking a rampant collective spell on humanity. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're
And
so welcome. And thank you. Thank you for having me on and for speaking your own wisdom and truth about these things, because it's so needed. Everyone needs to be speaking about this. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Well, all of your links will be here for everyone to find a way to connect with you. And actually, something that I noticed about you before we talked today is how much you share online about your life and the love and connection and closeness that you have with your partner, who I understand is your soon to be wife. And
Mhm.
it's just so healthy, your embodied example. This in itself, that you're not in a place of judgment in the work that you're doing. You're not just coming from a conceptual stance. You're so embodied in the practitioner that you are. And I think it's just healing for people, men maybe in particular, to see the embodiment of a loving, healthy relationship,
Mm.
And one of the craziest things of all to me about pornography is, wouldn't you rather be experiencing the real thing in your body than watching it on a freaking screen? Like, come on.
Yes, absolutely.
So many
Yeah.
blessings on your love and your marriage. And thank you once again, Tyson, for coming today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for sharing this episode with your friends if it's moved you. And know that sharing it genuinely does help to spread this message and also to attract more interesting speakers to join the Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversation. And if you're a woman who'd like to get an exclusive discount to the full signature program of how to live beyond patriarchal sex, then write a 5-star review on either Apple or Spotify, take a screenshot and send it in to the email address below to get the reduced rate to the full course called I Broke the Spell. And keep tuning in to these weekly episodes so that we can all be part of shifting division into connection for ourselves and for the coming generations.